Welcome to part 2 of my React Native animation tutorial. In the first tutorial we looked at how you can link an animation value to our styling, and we initialized the value at 0 and we drove it from 0 to 1, and then we watched how that would transform the styling, and then we manually reset it back to 0. The purpose of this tutorial is I'm going to teach you how to loop animations and also how to manually start and stop them midway through their cycle. Same as last time, I'm going to do a quick and concise walkthrough, and then we're going to take a little bit more time later on to explain what we've done and why. So yeah, just to begin with, we've got this pretty basic application. We've got a container. Inside of the container we've got this view with a style of bar, and this is going to be the component that we're animating. And then we've got 3 buttons which currently don't do anything. They'll start, stop and reset the animation. Basic styling, our imports, we've imported the animated library from React Native. We've also imported the useRef hook from React. Before we get into it, I'll just really quickly say a lot of this code is going to be repeated from last time. I made the conscious decision not to just copy and paste it in. Even though a lot of the code is very similar, I know it can be overwhelming when you start a tutorial and there's already a bunch of stuff in there. So I've tried to keep that to a minimum. A lot of this will be familiar, but it's a good way to learn. So step 1, create animation value. We're going to say, last time we called it animation value, this time we'll call it animation A. We're going to use the useRef hook. Remember, we've got to get the current property of that useRef hook, and we're going to say exactly the same as last time, new animated.value 0. And the reason I called it animation A is later in this tutorial we're going to have a second animation value, so we need to distinguish them. Step 2, animation driver, we're going to call it loop color, because that's exactly what we're going to be doing. We're using the useRef hook. This time we're going to be going animated.loop, and then within that animated.loop we're going to nest this animated.timing. Otherwise it's going to be very similar. We're going to say to value 1, duration, we'll say 3 seconds this time, 3000 milliseconds, and use native driver false. And then just go down here and say .current. Link animation value to styling. Like I said, we're going to be looping the color. So here we've got background color black. We're going to take that out, go animation A dot interpolate, our input range. This will change later in the tutorial, but for now we'll just go 0 to 1. Output range black to yellow. Last time I did black, gray and white, which was stupid in hindsight because black turns gray in the process of going to white anyway. That was really stupid, but anyway, forget about that. And so we've linked our value, and now we just need to add the onPress events. So I'm going to come down here. This will be very similar to last time. I'm just going to say loop color dot start. Down here we'll say loop color dot stop. And then there is one last step before we press anything. We've just got to make sure this is an animated component. You'll remember last time if we tried to animate a normal view, it'll throw an error. So we need to make sure that's an animated component. And so now let's see what happens here. When I hit start, you'll see it starts to transform the color. It goes from black to yellow, and then it snaps back to black. Now later on I'm going to show you how to make that smooth, to go black to yellow back to black in a real cyclical kind of motion. But for now we'll just leave it like this. And you'll see when I hit stop, midway through the animation, that will actually freeze it in place. So it's stuck at this kind of dim yellow color. The problem at the moment though is if we try and go start, nothing's going to happen. It's just stuck where it is. And the reason is because we don't have any reset functionality. So now I'm going to come down here. I'm going to say loop color dot reset, and this is a partial solution, and you'll see why. So now if we hit reset, it doesn't appear to do anything, but we can actually run the animation through again. So if I stop it midway through, I press reset, it doesn't look like anything's happened, but then when I hit start, it's working again. But that's not ideal. We would ideally want it to reset to its default styling, so to go from halfway through and snap back to black. So in order to do that, we just need to add one more line of code. We'll say animation A dot set value 0, and you'll remember we touched on this last time. And now we go reset, start, stop it halfway through, hit reset, and now it is going back to its initial styling. So that's the quick walkthrough of what we're going to do. If that's all you wanted, if you just want a demo, you can skip ahead to the next part of the tutorial. Otherwise, keep watching for an explanation of what we just did and why. In the last video, I spoke in a bit of detail about the principles behind animation and React Native. So we're initializing a value, we're creating an animation driver to transform that value, and we're linking the value to our styling parameters. I'm not going to speak about that again, nor am I going to go into too much detail about some of this stuff up here, just because it is repeated content. But there are a few things I did want to touch on. The first thing is our animation driver here. As you can see, we've kind of got a driver nested within a driver. So we've got this linear one here, which is very similar to what we did last time. We're just specifying a value that we want to go to, the duration over which we need to get there, and the useNative driver, which I touched on last time. But we're nesting that within a loop. And so this loop, what it does is pretty self-explanatory, really. It's just when it gets to 1, it's automatically resetting it back to 0. And it's just repeating that same animation cycle over and over again. So that's cool. It allows us to animate things in a hands-off kind of way. The styling is effectively identical. There is something I want to touch on here, which I'll come back to in a moment. But the other important point is what's going on here with these event handlers. So in particular, this reset button down here. Now, I just showed you that if we don't have this line of code here, where we reset animation A to 0, and we start the loop, we get halfway through, we stop, reset. We've reset the animation driver, but we haven't actually reset the styling. So although the driver has reset to 0, the styling remains the same as when we paused it. And the reason for that is there's actually a subtle difference between the animation value and the driver. Now, I'm not going to go into that. It'll just confuse you. To be honest, it'll confuse me as well. But just, I suppose the takeaway point is that the styling changes won't take effect until you actually hit start on that driver again. So you reset the loop, it's back to 0, it's ready to go at 0, but the styling won't actually take effect until that starts running again. So it's kind of like the styling and the driver are uncoupled from each other in that sense. And that's why I said in the last tutorial, it is important to sometimes have this line of code that resets the driver and this that resets the value. Otherwise, things end up out of whack. And there's another way that it can go wrong as well. So if we don't reset the driver and we just reset the value, then we end up in this situation here where we are, sorry, just for demonstration's sake, I'll put that back in. I'll reset it. Now I'll take this line of code out. And now if we start the loop, we stop at halfway, we reset. It looks as though it's reset, because we've set the animation value back to 0, and because that's linked to our styling, we're saying, okay, animation value is back to 0, 0 equals black, therefore it appears like it's all good to go. But if we hit start again, we see that nothing happens, and the reason for that is because we haven't reset the driver. So in effect, there's two ways you can go wrong. You can fail to reset the value, or you can fail to reset the driver. In both cases, it's going to cause the animation to not function properly. So particularly when you're working with loops, it's important to have both of those lines of code. Otherwise, like this start, this stop, it's pretty much the same as we did last time. And just to quickly revisit why we do this, the fact that we've got our driver contained within a useRef hook and stored in this variable enables us to go down here and say loop color stop, loop color start in a very concise kind of way. If we didn't contain it within this hook, we would have to type everything out manually, and that does get a little bit messy. I mean, you can do it, there's nothing wrong with it, but it does make for kind of messy coding. So I think it's much better to do it this way. And the last point I wanted to make as well is, so over here. So one thing I did talk about is at the moment with our animation, it's kind of going from black. Sorry, I'll reset it. It's going from black to yellow, and then it's bouncing straight back to black. And in some instances, that might be what we want, but more often than not, when you're doing a looped color effect, you're probably going to want it to be a very smooth cycle through. And that's actually a super, super easy thing to fix. Literally all you have to do, I'll stop it, reset it. Literally all you need to do is just add a 0.5 value in the middle here. So now the length of our input range array is 3. And then we just go like this. So 0, 0.51, black, yellow, black. And now we haven't changed a single thing except that. But now when you look at the loop, it'll just go through like that. And so it's a much smoother gradient through the colors. And one last thing I did want to touch on. In every demonstration so far, or in most of my demonstrations so far, I've gone from 0, from 0.5, and then to 1. But you don't need to do it that way. It doesn't need to be that routine. Like I could go 0, 0.8, and 1. And now if we look at how the how it works over here, it's very kind of like an exponential, like it goes slowly up to yellow, and then it dives back down to black. And that's a reflection of the fact that we don't have a linear input range here. It no longer goes 0.51, it now goes 0.81, and then the non-linear nature of that is reflected in the way that the colors change on the animation. And that sort of leads into easing, which is what I'm going to do in the next tutorial, which will show you how you don't actually need to hard code that at all. You can just append literally just a matter of a few words to the end of an animation, and it'll have the same effect but in an even more pronounced way, and it's actually a lot easier.